I'm at La Torretta in Grottaferrata. I can see Rome in the distance. The sea is not too far from here. It's about a 35-minute drive, and it's magical. You've got these ancient walls with cascading rosemary. You can hear some roosters crowing in the distance. And I'm here at La Torretta, which is this incredible biodynamic vineyard. They're practicing this really respectful style of agriculture, treating the entire farm as a really complex entity rather than just focusing on growing as many grapes as possible. They grow, for the moment, mostly white grapes, trebbiano and malvasia. And by they, I mean Maria Enquist and her husband, Riccardo Magno. This has been in Riccardo's family for well over 150 years. They came here just around Italian unification. They've been using ancient grottos and Roman-era cisterns for making wine, and it is spectacular. By the way, Parlatores runs vineyard visits here. And so if you're visiting Rome and you want to see a real functioning farm and vineyard in the works, my buddy Maurizio DeFranco will take you. And you'll get to taste these crazy wines with the most spectacular view over chestnut trees and vineyards and olive groves, which is all in the distance. It's stunning. So let's go visit. The house is right above us, and we're in this kind of grotto. Now there are modern tiles, but this was all built as a cistern in the 3rd century BC. Now you've got wine bottles that are stored, but back in the day, that hole would have been below a wine press, and then the juice would have run into this room, which was closed. You can see they've actually busted a hole into it to connect these two areas, but you can really imagine when you look around the vault and envision that grape juice would have been fermenting down here. Now it's happening in another area, which I'll show you. So the vault above me was all laid here by hand. It's a mix of tufa and basalt and all this volcanic stone that was produced in this area as recently as 50,000 years ago. So when you see the silhouette of the mountain range around Grottaferrata and just generally the Castelli Romani area, those are spent volcanoes and are responsible for the very material around us and also the soil that the grapes grow in. So this now nice home for potted plants is a wine press. So imagine that used to be above the sort of skylight down in the grotta. And so the grapes would be pressed, like pulverized under pressure, and then the juice would run into that room that we were just in. Right next to it is the grotto where prisoners of war were kept during the Second World War. So imagine that during the Nazi occupation of Rome, all these Allied bombardments that sent the Germans scattering, including into the countryside, and the people who were living here at the time captured them and then imprisoned them in this room. Meanwhile, many of these people had lost their homes in the bombings, and so were living in the grotta, which is underneath us, where the wine is made at La Torretta today. So the family that owns this vineyard is also practicing a type of agriculture that is biodynamic. And so they are very interested in creating conditions in the soil and in the vineyard, which doesn't just grow grapes. You could see that there are chestnut trees and olive trees out there too, so this rich biodiversity. And so they're interested in cultivating not just the fruit, but also the bacteria and the yeasts and the funguses that naturally grow in the soil. And all of this contributes to a really healthy soil life, which then nourishes the fruit, which then makes really delicious wine. And that all happens just down below. We are in a place where things just grow spontaneously. Between the vines, there's mint, but arugula, my favorite also, arugula. And I just had a bite, and it's so peppery. It's this wild plant. And although I'm anticipating comments, you gotta wash it before you eat it. It's got such a piquant flavor. It's almost burning, but in a great way. That one's covered in black spots. Even though we're in an area that overlooks a volcanic peak in that direction, and then there's a valley down here, within this sort of swath, you have dozens of different types of soil that cause the grapes to have different characteristics. In addition to the malvasia and trebbiano, so two classic central Italian white grapes that grow all over Lazio, they're not producing wine for labeling. This is just wine for family consumption, and it's a bunch of red grapes. We've got cesanese, sangiovese, and aglianico. So classic Southern Italian red grapes. So there's a little bit of mix of everything here. So when you look at the space between the planted vines, this is going to be in stark contrast to a lot of Italian and really global grape cultivation. They are not dosing the land with tons of chemicals to kill the other plants in the vineyard. The idea is that you have this entire community of plants that are fertilizing the soil, introducing nutrients, penetrating the soil in order to improve hydration, and therefore you want to keep things alive. I even see like a wild mushroom growing there. And so in addition to being big old fiber-rich salad, it's also serving this important function of nourishing the vineyard. This is basalt. There's actually a wall up here, a dividing wall that collapsed, which now has scattered on the ground. And so you can see the different types of volcanic stone. And the basalt isn't all identical, right? Because you have all these chemical reactions happening during the eruptions, which creates basalt of different densities, different sort of color palettes. And in addition to the very dense basalt, that's the same stuff that we walk on in Rome, the San Pietrini or cobblestones. There's also tufo, which is much more porous, much lighter, and is great for also drainage. So if you're thinking about how to water a vineyard in a place like this, they're not irrigating. They're relying on rainfall and then the water table to sort of contain that nourishing water for the plants. And so having a really porous soil is ideal for that, at least in this particular vineyard. A few months ago, they harvested the grape bunches and then destemmed them, and now they've created this compost, which is already a very vibrant place. You can see all the weeds and dandelion greens and chicory growing out of it. In a place like this, you're not just like chucking things in the trash, but always reintroducing natural things into the vineyard space. So just next to the Trebbiano vineyard is this vast grotto that is hand dug out of the living rock. Mostly tufa, also some basalt, volcanic sand. You could see the layers when the volcanic material deposited after eruptions. And you can also see the tool marks that were used as the workers excavated from the entrance here towards now the end of the corridor. So what we're in is this kind of maze of tunnels that was dug out of the living rock more than 2,000 years ago, and then in the 1870s was turned into a place for wine production and storage. So envision like 300 barrels down here. And as we sort of navigate through this labyrinth, we're going to be heading in one direction, which is underneath the parking lot, another direction, which is underneath the cistern. So you have this vast network of tunnels, all interconnected beneath the vineyards and the house. And while the other part of the subterranean area that we saw up the hill was used as a cistern for storing water, this instead was more of like a quarry for stone. And as the enslaved engineers who worked here encountered different compositions of soil, they would change the shape of the vault. So we've got a semicircular vault here, becomes a pointed vault further on. So imagine that the Romans, when they were co-opting the labor and technology of other people, they were putting many of them to work in these quarries in order to extract building materials that would then be used in Rome. So just down past the valley over there. Meanwhile, you have these little niches. Those were made in a later period, much more recently, perhaps just a couple of hundred years ago. And in the Castelli Romani, and especially in Grottaferrata, it's the custom for wine to be aged in large 1,000-liter volume chestnut barrels. And so as we walk down the corridor, you're going to see each niche has a barrel, with the exception of the one that has a terracotta jug called an amphora. It's made in Tuscany from terracotta, which itself is a volcanic material, and sort of as a throwback to ancient Roman winemaking techniques, where these large terracotta jugs are where the grapes would ferment. They would also be used for the storage of olive oil, grain, other commodities. So in addition to the very classic but more modern chestnut barrels that are used in winemaking in Grottaferrata and the Castelli, La Torretta also has some terracotta jugs of different shapes and sizes. They prefer this one, which has point at the bottom, and so the organic materials, little bits of skin, or the spent yeast, as the wine rests, those things naturally drift to the bottom, and it creates a sort of natural filtration system. So you have the upper part of the liquid, which is sort of naturally clarified in this way. There are other ways to clarify wine. Often they're kind of like shocking. If you're wondering why a lot of vineyards are now putting vegan on their wine labels, it's to signal that they're not using any egg protein or fish bladder protein or gelatin or something like that, some animal-based product, to clarify the wine. So what's additionally shocking is that wine is one of the only things that we consume that doesn't come with a label with the ingredients on it. And so that's why I love coming to vineyards like this. You can actually talk to the winemakers, you can see where things are being made, you can get a sense of the sensibilities of how they're making wines. And La Torretta makes wine with grapes. Nothing added, nothing taken away. It's really different than a lot of the competitors in the area, which are adding dozens or more types of interventions, chemicals, citric acid, all sorts of things to manipulate the wine or to clarify it. So here we're just dealing with straight grapes, which I like. They're not actually in use right now, but these large cement tanks were also used for wine production. And they had to be poured in place down here because the door wasn't big enough to fit prefabricated tanks. And so this concrete, which is a mix of like pozzolana, volcanic sand, some of which just came off on my hand, is a kind of like inert material for the wine to be fermenting in. So unlike stainless steel or wood, it's not imparting any like characteristics to the finished product of the wine. When you look inside, you'll see it's got this sort of like coating in the interior. And so it just becomes this very stable container for the wine to ferment and age. So while the terracotta jugs that are displayed on ground level are, I don't know, maybe like 3.5 feet tall, imagine that same size vessel with the mouth opening at floor level. So below this basalt cobblestone arrangement, you have terracotta jugs similar to the one just down the hall. Già ti dico ora, non è l'angolo preferito. Madonna. Buona la cifra. In addition to visiting this beautiful vineyard, I'm also making like a Pinterest board for all the dream features I want my country house to have. And the winemakers Maria Enqvist and her husband Riccardo Magno have, I think, really nailed it with the tasting view. We're overlooking the Trebbiano vineyards that produce the grapes for the sparkling wine. Over Maurizio and Frank's shoulder is a barbecue. I can hear water in the distance cascading over these handmade tufa stone vats. I mean, honestly, like, you can't make this shit up. This is some country living. I never know how these work. So Torretta, the name of the wine is the name of the vineyard, is a blend of Trebbiano and Malvasia, so the two classic grapes of the zone, vinified in cement and amphora and then joined together. And it's got incredible aromatics thanks to the Malvasia, really nice acidity. It's like a really fresh and delicious wine that's honestly really good with these salumi. Got some capocollo, salame, and then of course we got some pizza. Of course, always pizza. So we've done the bubbles. We've had one of the still wines. This is the second. It's called Castagna, after the little plot of land down there next to chestnut trees. Castagna means chestnut. And so this is a blend of Malvasia and Trebbiano that is fermented and aged in Castagna. The barrels are handmade in Albano, which is not far from here. So we've got, again, this more celebration of nature, celebration of local culture, all coalescing in the glass. Why are you looking at me? What are you looking at? So that has been a visit at La Torretta, which is so close to Rome. I mean, I could literally see it from here. And we're still immersed in this nature. I've got like a rooster over here, some chickens hanging out. This is heaven. I'm obsessed. You can also visit, just hit us up at Parla Tours, and Maurizio will take you. and you'll get to taste all these delicious wines, walk through the tufa caves, and experience what is literally 23 centuries of history in a glass. Ciao.